Okay, ready.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the second in our series for vital signs, and this one's about exploring the themes and opportunities for community foundations who are embarking on vital signs or considering vital signs for 2021. There's no doubt this past year has presented a lot of challenges for us, and it's a great opportunity to look at how vital signs can share the story of our community as we move forward through this pandemic and how our communities are shifting and changing as a result of that. So my name is Cindy Lindsay, and I am the co-director of Learning and Network Engagement with Community Foundations of Canada, and I will be your host for this session today. And before we get started, I just want to give everyone a reminder. As Tracy said, we have everyone on mute, and we are recording today's webinar. So if you need to access the recording, it will be available in our resource library. If you want to share it with others on your team or with your board, please do so. Please use the chat box function for any questions you may have. We always stress that these types of webinars are yours, your time to learn and pose the questions so you get the most out of it. So please use the chat box, and then at the end we'll have time to address the questions with our presenters. So I'd like to acknowledge that we have people calling in here today from coast to coast. Welcome everyone. I am calling in today and hosting you today from my home in snowy Elora, Ontario. And I would like to acknowledge that I live on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Wyandot, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee First Nations. This is known as the people of the Between the Lakes Treaty and the Haldimand Tract. I'm really grateful for the stewardship of this land as we humbly seek to live together in pursuit of justice and right relations. And so I appreciate you taking just a moment to think about your own land acknowledgement and where you're calling in from. So next slide, please, Tracy. So it's my pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues here at Community Foundations of Canada. Alison Sidney, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and leads the Vital Signs Program for CFC, and Miranda Hassel, our Communications Consultant. I am going to turn it over to the two of them who are going to walk you through today's webinar, and take it away, Alison.
Thanks, Cindy, and welcome everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar faces today, and I'm seeing all the weather reports coming through on the chat. I think it's a cold day in Canada today. It's great to have you with us. We're going to do a really quick overview of the Vital Signs program, and then we're going to dive into the themes for 2021 and reflecting on the last year and what that looks like in a vital signs context, and how we can respond to changing community conditions and learn a little more through vital signs. And we'll also spend some time, Miranda will speak to a case study, if you will, on the National Vital Signs Report, since we did start it pre-pandemic and then had to shift and react to the new reality of COVID-19. So she's going to talk a little bit about what we did at our team, within our team. And we'll also highlight a few community foundations that did vital signs work throughout 2020. And then last, we'll just go over a few next steps and key dates, and we'll end with questions and answers. So if you have any questions as we go through the slides, please just type them in the chat. I believe Cindy and Tracy are going to be doing a great job of monitoring that, and we'll take questions at the end. Tracy, if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So, and then the next slide again, please. So I'll dive right in. As most of you know, Vital Signs is Canada's most extensive community-driven data program. It's spearheaded by Community Foundations of Canada, but it's really led by community foundations in Canada at the local level and also around the world. We have more than 65 community foundations in Canada that are engaged in vital signs, and by that I mean they're producing reports. So there are many more community foundations that are engaged through community consultations, vital conversations, and they're really doing that community knowledge research. In addition, we have 41 community foundations that are working internationally on the program, who also produce vital signs reports. So it's really a great way to tell the story of our communities all around the world. As you may know, vital signs is used to better understand the vitality of our communities, and learn about the health and well-being, and really take stock of how things are going within our communities. And we can also look at how our communities are being experienced through different individuals, different populations within our community. And really the intention of vital signs is to learn more about our community so that as a community foundation network, we can better respond to the needs that we've identified through our research. Tracy, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So as I was saying, it's a really good way for us to learn more about what the community conditions are through our research. And we can use that information to help inform our foundation strategy and priorities. So for some, this means updating your granting strategies. It could mean a whole new granting stream. It could mean the development of new partnerships. And for some community foundations, you might choose to look at the conditions of the community across a wide range of themes, or it could mean just focusing in on a couple of the theme areas. So if you identify that youth with mental health or mental health concerns is a major issue, you might choose to focus in on that, or food security, really depending on what your community needs are. And those vital conversations and community consultation events are really great ways for your community foundations to learn more directly from the community about the priorities and the really pressing needs that are going on at this moment in time. So Community Foundations of Canada, we've put together a bit of a guide or a toolkit on how you can conduct good vital conversations locally, which was updated last year to reflect virtual events. So how to host a really good virtual vital conversation as we transition to a more virtual world. And last, I'll just mention that CFC aligns its data collection with the Sustainable Development Goals. We've been doing that over the past couple of years, which is a universally accepted standard for measuring community well-being and sustainability around the world. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about that community data. Each year, CFC partners with IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, to collect research, and they also provide participating community foundations with about 80 indicators that relate to the themes that are listed there. So I won't read through them all, but you can see there's a variety of types of data that we're looking at every year, and the data we always try to attain in a way that it can be disaggregated down to the community level as much as possible. And we're also looking at intersectionality and equity-based indicators. So we're looking to see how are these different data points affecting people in the community differently. This year specifically with IISD, we're hoping to access new survey data that's been released during COVID. We recognize that the census data is outdated as we're anticipating a new census release next year. And so this year we're really wanting to look for new surveys that have been released or initiated during COVID. I can put a link in the chat, which actually links to StatsCan's new website where they're compiling all of their new data that they've started to conduct that's relevant to changed COVID context. So we're going through this to see what we can use this year. We're also prioritizing data that can be disaggregated by sex, age, and race. And as well, those SDG related indicators as normal with an additional focus on equity for this year. As I said, StatsCan is working on being able to disaggregate data to be able to provide more comprehensive demographics in the upcoming census. So we're excited for that. And there are also narratives evolving in current data that will be expanded on in the upcoming census. So I think next year, the census data is going to be really valuable. And I also next wanted to shift slightly from the data and into the actual model for the program this year. So as you may be aware, in late 2020, we shared that there was a new pricing plan coming for vital signs. So in previous years, the price was modeled based on the size of the community foundation that was participating. We've change this model. So now there's a set rate for all community foundations, and instead it's disaggregated into 3 categories that look at what you're actually receiving back for the contract or the money that you're investing. So at the very basic level, for $250 a year, you will have access to the brand licensing, the brand collateral and templates, and the resources and learning modules. So you'll basically get the support that you need, as well as a license to use the brand. The standard model includes additional support from CFC, as well as community data from IISD. So as I mentioned in the last slide, those 80 or so indicators that we provide each year for your catchment area would be included in that standard, that price. On the next level up, we have the premium offer, which is inclusive of a new digital platform. So we've been working with IISD to launch a new data platform. It looks much like MyPeg. So if you navigate to mypeg.com, that's mypeg.com, it's kind of the next iteration of what that site looks like. And we've been working with IISD to be able to offer this site so that it can be customizable to each community foundation based on your branding, your preferences, the specific themes that you'd like to focus on. There will be space for a call out if you'd like to focus on a particular area of interest, and there will be additional spaces for text. So we're excited to be able to offer this. We're offering it for free with the purchase of data. And this year, we will also be able to provide workshops and training to help community foundations onboard with their data platform into May. So we'll also have IISD working with us throughout the year to provide ongoing technical support. So we're really excited about this. It's our pilot year, it's brand new. So we anticipate that it'll be a really great learning experience for our network. And the idea is that it will help to modernize the program a little bit more. And it's also responding to feedback we've heard from many community foundations that there is a desire to go the digital route. So we're hoping that this model is taken up and used and appreciated and works well, basically. So we'll be accepting feedback at the end of the year from those who are early adopters. You could go to the next slide, please, Tracy. I think there's one just before that one. So I basically went over the pricing model already. There are some more details about it. The slides will be shared after the webinar. So whatever I've captured verbally, you'll have that there in writing. And on the next slide, I'll hand it over to Miranda, who will walk us through our work with the National Report Series and how we can incorporate COVID-related data into our work this year.
Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in our wide, beautiful country. So in this section, I'll be using the National Report on Gender Equality that we released in October as a bit of a case study on how we pivoted the report to be relevant during the pandemic. I did see a question pop up that I am going to address quickly because it is relevant to what I'm going to be talking about. So there was a question that said that there seems to be a disconnect between community-driven data and the introduction of a national theme. Is there evidence that a national theme is undermining or supplanting community-driven data? So I'll just speak briefly to this. I had some notes on this already. So much of the data in our national report comes from community and is locally based. So you'll see in my presentation that there are multiple local examples. And if you go through the report yourself you'll see so many more. And also, the power of a national network of community foundations is creating a national narrative and national momentum where we can respond together to specific issues that might actually be translating in multiple communities across the entire country. So together as a network, we have the power to shift and really catalyze change when it comes to gender equality across the whole country. The national report can be used locally to not only to support the work you may be doing specific to gender equality, but to help provide a gender lens or a gendered context to other issues like climate change, leadership, Indigenous rights, public safety, and intersecting identities like sexual orientation, ability, class, and race. So for the reports that we released in October, communications wise, we also designed the report and many of the key messages to assist with advocacy and for people to see and use the report as a case for support for women, two-spirit, and gender diverse led and serving organizations. The report has multiple actionable examples, and that inclusion was essential for us, as we know that women across the country are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So it became even more urgent to have the report focused on gender equality. Tracy, can you advance the slide, please? Thank you. So in April 2020, which feels like a decade ago, we at CFC had full drafts of our reports. But from June to September, we developed a content strategy to update the reports. They became much longer, and that is because the story was much bigger. Statistics Canada was doing new primary research, which Allison has already mentioned, but not all of that was available to tell the whole story. We had to expand our content strategy. So this is where going into that community level data really helped us build it out, going to local community organizations who were doing primary research and including that as well. This made the whole report more inclusive, more comprehensive, more accurate, and told a better story. In addition to the issues, we also have listened to specific calls for greater accountability to community foundations and philanthropy writ large. Next slide, please. Here we go. When we say that these are gender equality reports, what we're saying is that every data point has a gendered angle. No one person is one thing. We enter a room as our full selves with diverse experiences, even if you do not identify as a woman, as two-spirit, gender non-binary, or fluid. These issues impact us all. So we started with a good foundation for this with our first drafts, but we were able to take it even deeper over the course of the summer to have a truly inclusive report that reflects all the various communities that we live in. I'm actually going to quickly drop a link into the chat to a webinar that was produced by us in last June that explores this idea of intersectionality, and you can see the definition here on the screen. Okay, next slide, please. So we published 3 reports: Peace, Power, and Planet. Peace tackled public and private safety, the justice system. Power used a very broad definition as well, tackling economic and cultural power, decision-making power, and leadership. And Planet tackled climate change and the gendered impacts of it. Next slide, please. We had to look at the whole picture of what was happening in Canada and create a web of connections and narratives to identify the gaps. We needed to find new data, and to do this, we focused on building new and existing relationships with organizations doing primary research, making our own internal data public, and developing the narrative. And one of the ways that we did this is by commissioning 3 Indigenous women to write about their expertise and fields of interest. Next slide, please. We also commissioned a series of journal articles to supplement the report written by community leaders and subject matter experts to really illustrate the impact of the pandemic according to their expertise, lived experience, and their local communities. So two examples are Elle Jones wrote one of them. She's a professor, journalist, and poet in Nova Scotia, and Maya Roy, who is the CEO of YWCA Canada. Next slide, please. Speaking to the greater calls for accountability throughout 2020, and which will no doubt continue throughout 2021, we put this section in the Power Report to speak to these specifically. So Senator Ratna Amidvar made a public call to charities and specifically named Community Foundations of Canada, saying that we need to make data on our network demographics and leadership publicly available. And in Vital Signs, we made the commitment to collect and distribute that data. In the fall, we started our surveys. If you search your inboxes, you will find an email if you didn't see it already, which we're rolling out over the next few months. The final survey will be a diversity and inclusion survey, and we're hoping to share those findings at our summit in June. A bit of a teaser for you. Next slide, please. In terms of us being transparent, and also building the report to be a case for support, to more explicitly mobilize funding to women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse serving organizations. We included some data from the Emergency Community Support Fund to show the funding gaps in allocations to these groups. Next slide, please. So now I'll give an example from each Power, Planet, and Peace of the content that we added, the new content, and why. So in Power, we already had data on the costs of childcare, how it is exorbitant in some places and inaccessible to some families and others. We looked at the care gap as people were forced out of the workforce, at the disproportionate burden on mothers to maintain the home, be primary caregiver, and in many cases, continue full-time work. We wanted the report to have solutions and not just focus on the problems also, because there are so many solutions, they just need to be funded. So an example that we included on the right side here, you'll see an example from the Ontario Nonprofit Network, which was funded through the Investment Readiness Program, to begin the process of a framework for a sector-wide parental leave top-up fund. The impacts on the advancement of women's careers in the sector, particularly for those without stable income or as main breadwinners, would be immense. Next slide, please. This screenshot is not as pretty as it's a text-heavy page, but here it is, and I hope that you will go into the report and read it if you haven't. This is from the Peace Report. We added a lot to this report. With a new level of public scrutiny on policing and the justice system, we had a lot to consider. Safety is a daily issue for women, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people in Canada, with a diverse set of experiences and further obstacles depending on the intersecting identities of that person. So what we did was what Vital Signs is meant to do. We looked at what the community data said. This one page of Vital Signs brings multiple issues together that are bound by one thread: gender equality, family unification, child apprehension, racism, incarceration, and the vulnerability of prison populations to COVID outbreaks. So there's examples here from the prairies, or quotes to reports from the prairies, and also from prisons in Ontario. The journal article that we published by Elle Jones supplements this section and has some great ideas as to how philanthropy can intervene or support in these areas. Next slide, please. In the Planet Report, it was a challenge to find data on the impacts of climate change that were disaggregated by sex and/or gender. The story of what was and is happening at the Wet'suwet'en checkpoints is an example, an excellent example of multiple issues converging at once that were highly relevant to the year 2020 and to a national report on gender equality. And this is a community-specific example. There are climate impacts of extractive industries, the physical danger posed by the work camps or man camps to Indigenous women, the women leading the assertion of their own land rights, and the forced removal of them from their land by the RCMP. We use data from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, among multiple other reports, and this powerful image to tell the story. To further demonstrate how all these issues are interconnected, we also included a link to the Planet Report, from the Planet Report to the Peace Report, which goes into more detail about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I think when considering a theme, if you chose a theme for your vital signs report or one sustainable development goal to focus your report on, there can be a misconception that it will be a single issue report. But I hope that I've demonstrated that these issues are so much more complex, and there are many ways that you can tell a story, a really important story, to mobilize people. So this is what we did, but we also want you to look to your peers. London, Windsor, Guelph, Victoria, Edmonton, Toronto, they all put out responsive reports last year. And you can see how they integrated the impacts of the pandemic into what would have been a business as usual vital signs report. I'm going to link a recording that we did in the fall where a few CFs shared their experiences. So I'll put that in the chat box. And we will be starting a learning cohort, a working group this year, so that you can all share with each other what you're working on and your ideas. So with that, I will toss it over to Allison, who will talk about next steps before we get into Q&A.
Thanks, Miranda. That was really informative and helpful, I hope. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Miranda said. We're really excited to hopefully offer some sort of learning cohort, I guess you could call it, where community foundations that are participating in Vital Signs this year will have the opportunity to connect on a semi-regular basis. The link that Miranda is sharing has a panel discussion with some of those community foundations that she mentioned, talking about their experience with doing a vital signs report after COVID had hit. So it looked like, you know, charities were tapped out, local data wasn't really available, or already it was not yet responsive to the changed conditions. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there's some really good conversation in that webinar that she's just linked that talk about what you can do as a community foundation to respond to these uncertainties and how to move forward with the Vital Signs report. And I'd really encourage you to look at their reports. They're amazing, super inspiring. And so we'd like to model kind of the second half of that meeting, which was just a generative conversation where community foundations came together to ask questions about what worked, what didn't work, what are some strategies for this year. And so we're hoping to continue on that trend of conversation and learning from one another throughout the year. Trace, if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to start to talk a little bit about next steps. In the next slide, thank you. So the next steps first would be to discuss with your team and identify your goals for vital signs. So that goes back to that piece around how do you want to use your vital signs beyond just collecting the research. Is it something like starting a new granting stream? Is it creating a new engagement strategy? Are you willing to shift your strategic plan? So just doing some thinking around what that could look like for you in a vital signs year. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to join the listserv. Send me an email and I will make sure that you get signed up there. That's where CFC shares outwardly all of our program updates, and also community foundations can use the listserv to ask questions of one another and share resources as well. We will be updating the agreement to participate and sharing it out over the listserv soon, and that will be due March 22nd, 2021. So that agreement basically confirms what level you're coming in to participate at, whether it's a basic, standard, or premium, what your focus might be for the year. And it also clearly lays out the resources that are available to you from CFC and some branding information. So that agreement is due March 22nd. And with that, we'll also be asking for you to confirm your geography if you are asking for data, because that helps us to make sure the data points we're collecting respond well to your catchment region. We'd also recommend that you start to explore who in your community is conducting research right now and start to make connections with those individuals or groups, and also start planning a vital conversation or some sort of informal community consultation where you can start to listen and hear and learn more about what the community priorities are, what are the pain points right now. And it also helps to generate awareness and buy-in and even potential assistance with your vital signs report. And then lastly, just to start thinking about the resources, financial and human, that can help with this project. We went into that in a little more detail in our recent webinar, which is on the website now, the Vital Signs 101 session. It was basically a high-level overview of the program. And so we can share that resource as well. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So key dates, just to recap, we're going to release a new participation agreement within the next month. The list of indicators that we land on will be released over the listserv on February 26th. That we're still in negotiation and just researching right now with IISD. So by the 26th, we should have a finalized list for you. March 8th to 12th, we're going to pick a date that week, and we'll be hosting a webinar in partnership with IISD that explains how you can define your geography. So based on the surveys that we're using this year, we might say, here's how to find your health region, economic region. So Kyle at IISD will walk us through the steps of how you can identify your geography so that it matches well with your catchment region. And then again, that deadline is March 22nd to submit your participation agreement. And then starting on April 15th will be the first data release. And that will happen on the 15th of each month until July, or the nearest business day. Missing from this list, but I'll add it is in May. We will be hosting a couple of workshops for those of you who are signing up for the data platform. There will be a couple of educational kind of working through how to get your data platform set up and responsive to the branding needs that you have. And then Vital Signs Week this year will be the first full week of October. So October 4th to 8th, if you want to plan for that. So I know that was a lot of information in pretty quick timelines, but wanted to hold space for questions. Cindy, I don't know if any questions have come through in the chat, but Miranda and I are happy to stay online for a while and respond to any questions that might be coming up.
Yeah, the first couple of questions you did answer, but here's a couple of ones. Some clarifications around the data platform only comes with the premium subscription, correct?
Correct. That's the data platform, right? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And a question around, is there a reason why we have why we need to have Vital Signs Week so early in October?
It's a good question. I think, you know, the history behind Vital Signs Week is that it was originally one day, and then that day coincided with a holiday, so it became 2 days, and then it became a week. And so it's just kind of always been the first week in October, and it aligns well with the project timeline in terms of those of you who are working on January to December kind of fiscal year. It works well for us to have those 10 months to develop the report and then have it out in the first week of October. I will say that more and more community foundations are moving away from this model, and that's okay. Vital Signs, as we speak about it, you know, it's a living, breathing entity where we learn consistently and we adapt and we respond. So more and more community foundations are finding that they might be doing more research throughout the year at different times. You know, early October might not work for other priorities at the foundation. So some community foundations are all opting for different timings. So it's really up to you at the local community foundation level if you do want to hit that target or if you would like to do something else.
Yeah, and just following up with Elaine's comment here, you know, if everyone released in October with a celebration at the end, that was sort of the original intent around Vital Signs. is that they would all be released across the country on a certain date or throughout a certain week. And it gives us a lift to that, absolutely. But it was also historically designed so that it was launched prior to municipal elections, which traditionally take place in early to mid-November. So it was an excellent time to engage local politicians around, the challenges and opportunities in our community, and that was a critical piece. But we know that things have changed dramatically since then, and every community foundation that embarks on vital signs has a strategy and the way they want to engage their community, and the timing might be different because of that. And it is a tight time frame, and so some just it's a capacity issue as well. So just to give you a little bit of extra information on there. There's also a question around, would it not be better to wait until 2021 census data is available probably in 2022 to get into the data?
Yeah, I mean, some community foundations will probably make that choice. I anticipate next year is going to be a very busy vital signs year because the data will be so robust and brand new. I think that there's some community foundations that are very keen to figure out what's changed, in wake of COVID-19. So there are some community foundations, I imagine, that are keen to kind of jump back in and really try to get into the community level and get into the tension points and learn more so that we can be responsive more quickly. So I think it's up to you to make that decision. And I think that we'll probably see community foundations going both ways.
I would also just add that Statistics Canada has been doing a lot of primary research over the last year on the impacts of the pandemic. The only thing right now is that we don't know how we will be able to disaggregate that data by geographies. So within the next month or so, we should have those answers. And so we might have a lot of great data that is quite recent to be able to share with you.
And, some of the community foundations responded to that kind of lack of new StatsCan data by conducting surveys with their community members and just doing a ton of primary research themselves, or connecting in with charities to learn more. And we noticed if you do take a chance to look at the Guelph Community Foundation report or London, for example, those are two great examples of community foundations that focused in on kind of like three main issues. So they looked at, I think, gender equality, the opioid crisis, racial inequalities. And so things that were really top of mind this year. They did kind of a very focused short report. London's is even digital. It's on their website, so you can go take a look. Where they just did kind of what were the top priorities in their community this year, and how did they kind of provide a bit of an overview just to check in. So that's also another option.
Yeah. A question about Allison, if you could repeat that extra date that participants need to know from the last slide. It wasn't listed. I don't know if we need to go back to that last slide, if you can remember.
The one for May. Yeah, I have to double check which date specifically it is, but I know that for those of you who are signing up to participate on the data platform, there will be 2 training sessions in May. It'll be early May. I just have to confirm the specifics on that.
Okay, great. So stay tuned for that. A question about if participants can, or community foundations that are interested, can they attend the Defining Your Geography webinar without signing the agreement yet and making a decision?
Yeah. So that will take place, I think, about 2 weeks before the agreements are due. So you can attend and learn more. I recommend coming if you are intending to do it. Otherwise, it might be a little bit dry. It's a lot of looking at maps. So I would say for sure you can join it and opt not to participate. But just want you to be aware that it's very map heavy, very detailed.
Great. Okay. So those that love maps, it's a must attend. So a question from a community foundation that's getting into vital signs for the first time. So do you recommend doing vital signs first and then hosting vital conversations, or vice versa? So maybe Allison, you could talk about how community foundations have leveraged vital conversations in both ways. And, because it's really great how they can do it either pre-report or post-report.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So you can leverage vital conversations at any point in the project timelines. And of course, they'll have different intentions. So, you can do a vital conversation as your first entry point into vital signs. So that could just be asking people to join you in a virtual room and just finding out what are the key priorities that are top of mind right now. And it can be a good way for the community foundation to learn about where they want to focus their vital signs report on. So you might hear overwhelmingly that there is one major problem that you need to do a little more research on it and raise more awareness about, or you might find that there's a bunch of things. So you need to go in also with just that you have community knowledge already as a community foundation. So just kind of listening and learn, being open to learn, but also making sure that things are reasonable in terms of what you might use as your scope of data collection. So it's a really good way to take stock of what people are saying. You could even host one specific with youth, one specific with newcomers, et cetera, to learn more about what different groups are experiencing, if that's an area of interest for you. And then that can be used to really guide your research and your priorities. Another opportunity for a vital conversation is while you're conducting your research. So once you've already figured out what your key priorities are, you might want to host another one with a targeted group or on a specific topic that you want to learn more about. And you could, run a survey, or you could do kind of like a feedback loop to learn more about what are people actually saying, what are the actual points, and how can you incorporate their feedback into your report. And then at the end, once you've published your vital signs report, it's another great time to do a vital conversation to reflect back on what you've learned and to share with the community what the key points are. And also it's a moment in time to invite your donors. It's a moment to invite key decision makers locally. Some community foundations have leveraged their reports in an election context, like you were mentioning earlier, Cindy, where they invite different candidates or they share their vital signs report at a candidate's debate. So you can really inform and guide public discussion and debate. You can also seek solutions. So you might invite a bunch of subject matter experts and say, what's the solution here? And bring in those local decision makers who might have to, change a policy, for example, to lead to systematic change. So there's a lot of different opportunities with vital conversations that can be leveraged anytime during the project timeline. For someone who's doing it first, I would definitely recommend doing that as a first step before the vital signs report.
Great. Thanks, Allison. A couple of questions around the data platform. So will most of the data on the platform be derived from Stats Canada? And then another question around, do we have a sample of it online that comes with a premium subscription to see before they make the decision?
So the data that will be uploaded onto the data platform is directly tied to the indicators that CFC purchases. So every year with Vital Signs, CFC purchases about 80 indicators and analysis around those indicators that are shared in typically Excel format. With the data platform, rather than receiving those data indicators through Excel, you'll be receiving them directly on your platform. So it'll be the same type of data. It'll be StatsCan data. It'll be, CMHC data. It'll be data from the RCMP. The same sources of data that we typically use for our vital signs collection will be the same data on the data platform. With that said, community foundations can upload their own data sets. So much like you would do your own primary research or secondary research and put it into your written report, you can actually create your own data sets or download, access your own data sets and upload them as well onto the platform. So ideally, it would be a mix of the data you receive from CFC mixed with the data that you collect locally to really visualize it in a digital space, much like you would in a printed report.
So, Allison, you mentioned the PEG and that data platform. Is the Vital Signs one similar to that? Could we pop in the website and direct people to take a look at that?
Sure. I'll put it in the chat. So it is similar. The layout is similar. It has been modernized. So we have worked with IISD to invest in a new version, like a newer version of MyPeg. So it's responsive directly to vital signs needs and requests. We had some really great feedback from community foundations. We've had a couple of run-throughs and demos and feedback sessions, and at our conference last year and through other opportunities where community foundations were able to provide input into the build and the design, which was super helpful. And so we're hoping that the version that we've come up with, that we have ready to launch, is responsive to needs that go beyond just what's there on MyPegs. Like I said, there's the call out box. There's space to have kind of more text-based information. We've introduced more flexibility around the data visualizations and also the branding, so the colors and the tones that you can use so that it's more reflexive of your local brand. So among other things, it is like MyPeg, just kind of the next version of it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. And just a question around timing, around how much time is involved in that spring and summer time frame for community foundations that are doing this for the first time. I know in the last week's webinar, you kind of mapped that out. And so Kelly, if you want to take a look at it as well, but if you just want to walk through that quickly.
Sure. So typically in the spring, community foundations are receiving data from CFC and they're accessing their own local data as well. So it is a busy time because you're collecting all of the data and you're also drafting your report and trying to figure out, okay, of all of this data, what are the ones that I want to use? How do I want to write this? How do I want to analyze it? How can I make sure it flows well? And then I'd say by August, probably you'd want to have a good draft because September, if you're aiming for the Vital Signs Week as your launch, September is really getting it finalized with your design team, translated if you have a bilingual audience. You're getting your launch plans ready, you're working on your communication strategy. So September is really the time where you're finalizing everything. So if you work back from there, August, you want to have a pretty good draft. July, you're putting in your final data pieces into your kind of final draft of the report. So it is busy. I think spring and late summer or summer are the busy times for Vital Signs.
Okay, and a couple questions around the data mapping. And so from Minerva from Mexico, wondering if international Vital Signs participants can use the data platform, or is it based completely on Canadian geography?
That's a great question. I think, so I'll share off the top that the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD, has been developing a similar tool that we've been working on with them that's international in focus. And so they have this site, it's tracking progress sites, that's what they're called. They're available to individuals working all over the world. I think right now they're working in Thailand. So they've got a lot of capacity to work internationally. Their team is internationally based. Right now, the iteration that we're working with for Vital Signs is just for Canadian foundations at the moment. But I know that we have the shared goal with IISD to expand internationally. So at the moment, I would say contact IISD and learn more about their offerings, and stay tuned for the time that we can offer our Vital Signs platform more broadly.
Yes, it would be a wonderful way to engage our international colleagues in this. So something to put on the to-do list down the road. A question around, can community foundations that are geographically close buddy up on Vital Signs? And we've got some great examples of that. Do you want to just talk a minute about that, Allison?
Yes, I would recommend that you look at the Sea to Sky Foundations, a group of 5 community foundations. I think I saw West Vancouver on the call. So they work together to tell the story of their region, which was a beautiful example of community foundations that are similarly located, telling the story of a broader region, bringing their local perspectives. I don't have the link handy, but I really strongly recommend looking at it because it was really beautifully done, and it was responsive to COVID, and it was just a great example of a great partnership.
Yeah. And for smaller foundations, it's just a great way to share resources and bench power in delivering vital signs as a collective effort. Absolutely. So I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. If there aren't any other questions, do you want to just skip to the next slide, Tracy? There is one question around, will the premium subscription is Vital Signs Week when the web platform, does the web platform become public facing during Vital Signs Week if you participate at that level?
I'm smiling because I see the chat going. Thank you, Libby and Claire, for sharing that report. So I don't, that's not something that we've built into the program design in terms of when the web platform becomes public facing. I believe it would probably be up to the local community foundation as to when you are ready to kind of unveil what you've been working on publicly. So there is functionality to be working on it in the back end and hide it from the public and then share it publicly when you're ready. We don't have stipulations around when you have to do that. So that would be up to you locally.
Okay, great, thank you. So just encouraging people, we've referenced that this recording and the one previous last week, the Vital Signs 101 will be in the resource library. So please go in there and do your search to access them if you need to share this information more broadly with your team or your board or volunteers. Also stay tuned on our events page to look at any other upcoming webinars. I know Allison's got a roster of, over the next 3-4 months to help onboard community foundations. So we'll be posting them on the events page, in addition to other amazing learning opportunities we have coming up for the network. But you'll also be sharing those dates out on the listserv as well. So yeah, and Allison, just some final thoughts and closing this out, and Miranda?
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
It's exciting to be back.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and appreciate you taking the time to join us today.